When I first started my podcast, I didn't even have a real mic. I had my phone, a blanket over my head to block the noise, and a voice full of stories that wouldn't stay silent. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what anyone would call a career, and certainly not what my parents called one. They believed in titles, in cubicles, in pay stubs that came with health insurance and predictable promotions. They didn't believe in passion that couldn't be explained on a resume. They didn't believe in dreams that didn't come with a pension plan. So when I said, "I'm launching my own podcast," they said, "That's cute. But when will you get a real job?" I laughed it off then, pretending it didn't sting. But I carried that sentence like a bruise I couldn't hide. I remember sitting at dinner one night, trying to share an episode idea about mental health, and my mom cut me off halfway through to ask if I'd applied anywhere respectable. My dad nodded in agreement, saying, "It's good to have hobbies, sweetheart, but you need something that pays." The word hobby burned. Because to me it wasn't a hobby, it was a heartbeat. Every episode was a piece of me that I was trying to put into the world. Every story was a lifeline for someone who might be struggling silently the way I once did. The night before my launch, I sat alone on the floor of my small apartment, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop, wondering if I was completely delusional. I had no studio, no sponsor, no guarantee anyone would even listen. Just a few pre-scheduled episodes, a dream that didn't make sense, and parents who didn't show up. I sent them the invite anyway. The text said, "Launch party, Saturday at 6. It's small but it means everything to me." My mom responded with a thumbs up emoji. My dad didn't respond at all. I told myself maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe deep down they were proud but didn't know how to say it. I decorated my tiny space with fairy lights and dollar store balloons that spelled out the word OAIR. My best friend brought cupcakes. My cousin brought his camera. My heart brought hope. When the clock hit 6, I kept glancing at the door. Every knock made my pulse quicken. Every silence stretched heavier. My parents never came. My best friend tried to distract me, saying, "Maybe they'll show up later." But later turned into goodbye and the cupcakes went cold. That night, when I blew out the candle on my celebratory cupcake, I didn't make a wish. I made a promise, to myself, that I would keep showing up for my dream, even if no one else did. I uploaded the first episode with trembling hands and a quiet determination. I didn't know then that the voice no one believed in would soon be heard across continents. At first, I got barely 20 listens. I knew half of them were petty clicks from people I begged to share. I stayed up late editing, learning sound mixing from YouTube, and recording between shifts at my part-time job. My parents never asked how it was going, but they'd remind me to apply for jobs. To be realistic, I remember once overhearing my dad tell a neighbor, "She's still figuring things out." That hurt, because I wasn't figuring things out. I was building something they couldn't see yet because it didn't fit into their idea of success. And then something shifted. One night, an email landed in my inbox. It was from a listener. A woman who said she'd been planning to give up on life until she heard my episode on Why Your Story Still Matters. She said, "You reminded me that I still have a voice." I read that email 3 times, tears blurring the screen. For the first time, I realized I didn't need millions of listeners to make a difference. I just needed one heart that felt less alone. That became my definition of success. I kept going. I upgraded from my blanket fort to a borrowed mic. I started inviting guests, people who had stories of resilience, grief, and rising again. I learned to edit out the self-doubt in my own voice. I learned to speak as if the girl who once whispered under blankets was finally ready to take up space. My audience grew, not fast, but steady. People began sending messages saying, "I feel seen. I've been waiting for someone to say this." I'd smile quietly, thinking about how my parents thought no one would care. Months turned into a year. I hit 100,000 downloads. Then 1 million still. My parents didn't listen, they didn't even ask. At family gatherings, when relatives asked what I did, my mom would say, "She's doing something with media," as if it were a phase I'd outgrow. My dad would change the subject to my brother's new promotion. I'd smile politely, stirring my drink, pretending it didn't matter, but it did. It mattered because all I ever wanted was for them to see that I wasn't lost. I was building a map. Then one morning everything changed. My phone buzzed nonstop. My inbox flooded. My notifications exploded. Someone texted me a link, and there it was. Forbes had featured me on their top 30 voices redefining media list. My photo, my name, my story. I sat frozen for a full minute before I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. I wasn't crying because I'd made it. I was crying because I remembered the girl who launched her dream alone while her parents stayed home. I remembered the silence at that empty party. And now the same voice that no one took seriously was being celebrated globally. That afternoon, my phone rang again. The caller ID read, "Mom." I stared at it for a moment before answering. Her voice came through shaky but cheerful. "Sweetheart, we saw you in Forbes. Your dad's been showing everyone. We're so proud of you." I didn't know what to say. For a second, I almost said, "Where were you when it wasn't Forbes?" But instead, I just said, "Thank you." Because I didn't have the energy to teach them how to clap for me when the world wasn't watching. They didn't understand that pride after validation isn't love, it's convenience. They asked me to come over for dinner that weekend. My mom said she'd make my favorite dish, the one she used to cook when I aced exams. I went not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see if I could sit at that table without the ache. When I walked in, my dad hugged me tighter than he ever had before. My mom couldn't stop smiling. They asked questions about the business side of podcasting, as if suddenly it was legitimate because Forbes said so. I answered politely, but part of me felt like I was sitting in a room full of strangers pretending to recognize me. They didn't see the nights I cried over editing glitches, the mornings I woke up questioning my worth, the sacrifices, the loneliness, the rejections. They saw the article, not the journey. They saw the success, not the silence. They didn't see the version of me who kept showing up without applause. But that's the version that built everything. The one who learned that belief is quiet, consistency is loud, and validation isn't required for value. After dinner, my dad said something that stuck with me. He said, "We just wanted you to be safe. We didn't want you to struggle." I nodded, understanding now that their doubt came from fear, not malice. Fear that the world would break me. Fear that dreams like mine don't come with insurance. But what they never understood was that I wasn't afraid of struggle. I was afraid of never trying. I'd rather fail at something that lights my soul than succeed at something that dims it. That night, as I drove home, I realized forgiveness doesn't always look like an apology. Sometimes it looks like letting go of the need for one. The next time I recorded an episode, my voice felt different, lighter, freer. I talked about what it means to chase something no one else understands. I said, "The people who can't see your vision aren't meant to build it with you." And that line resonated everywhere. It went viral. It was quoted, shared, repeated. It became a mantra for dreamers like me, the ones who start alone and build anyway, the ones who stop waiting for permission. I was invited to speak at a conference soon after. The same parents who once skipped my launch sat in the front row of a 1,000-person crowd, watching as I told the story of how I started under a blanket and ended up here. My mom cried. My dad clapped. And in that moment, I realized they weren't villains in my story. They were just characters who didn't understand the plot until the final chapter. Sometimes people don't clap because they don't hear the music you're dancing to. But that doesn't mean you stop dancing. Since then, my life has changed in ways I never imagined. Brand deals, book offers, stages I used to dream of. But more than anything, it's the messages from listeners that still mean the most. The girl who started with a phone now has a global audience, but she's still that same girl, just louder now. When I walk into studios or conferences, people greet me as if I've always been confident. But they don't know that confidence was built, not born. It was carved out of rejection, stitched together with persistence, and polished with every no. That didn't stop me. Sometimes people ask what I'd say to my younger self, the one sitting alone at that launch. I'd tell her, keep going. The silence will hurt, but it won't last. The ones who overlook you now will learn your name later. And when they call, you'll answer. But not because you need them. You'll answer because you've already healed. My parents listen to my podcast now. They send me episode suggestions, even though they don't quite get the lingo. My dad once said, "I told my colleague my daughter's a podcaster." He said his daughter listens to you. There was pride in his voice, the same pride I used to beg for. But now I don't need it to survive. I smile, I thank them, and I keep creating. Because validation isn't the currency of purpose, consistency is. And purpose always pays even when the world says it won't. When people tell me their families don't support their dreams, I tell them this: start anyway. Start before anyone believes in you. Start with what you have, where you are. Let them doubt you, it'll keep you grounded. Let them laugh, it'll keep you humble. Let them leave, it'll teach you to stand tall. Because the same people who once dismiss your dream will one day Google your name. And when they do, you'll smile, not out of spite, but peace. Because success without bitterness is the loudest kind. Now when I record, I think about that girl under the blanket, whispering into her phone, believing her voice mattered even when no one else did. She didn't know that her faith would take her this far. She didn't know that someday the same family who called her dream a phase would brag about her feature in Forbes. But she did know one thing, that her story was worth telling, even if no one was listening yet. And that's the beauty of faith. It doesn't require witnesses, it just requires work. Every episode, every story, every risk was a seed. I didn't know which one would bloom, but I planted anyway. And maybe that's why I can sit here today and say that the real win wasn't Forbes. It was becoming the kind of woman who didn't quit when no one showed up. So no, my parents didn't come to my launch. They didn't clap when I was small. But that's okay. Because I learned to clap for myself. I learned that the applause of others can't replace the sound of your own conviction. I learned that the ones who doubt your dream don't define it. And I learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means being able to tell the story without flinching. When I think about everything now, I smile. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I proved myself right. I proved that not a career could become a calling. I proved that a voice no one valued could change lives. I proved that success isn't measured by who shows up, but by who keeps going when no one does. And somewhere deep down, I know the girl under that blanket would be proud of the woman I've become. One who turns silence into sound, doubt into drive, and pain into power. When I first told my parents I was starting a podcast, they looked at me like I'd said I was building a spaceship in the backyard. My mom asked, "What will you do for money?" My dad laughed and said, "Podcasts aren't careers, sweetheart." They meant it as practical advice, but it hit me like a dismissal. I'd been brave enough to say out loud that I wanted to create something of my own, and the people who raised me couldn't see the value in it. I launched anyway. I sat on the floor of my apartment with a borrowed microphone, the hum of traffic outside my window, and a knot of nerves in my chest. I sent them the invitation to my tiny launch night. They didn't come. My mom texted a polite, "Good luck," and that was it. I remember staring at my screen, telling myself it didn't matter. But it did. I wanted them to see me try even if I failed. I wanted them to believe that my voice mattered. For a while, no one listened. I'd check the analytics and see numbers so small they felt like rejection letters. I learned to edit, to promote, to keep talking even when the silence on the other end felt deafening. When I hit 1,000 downloads, I called home. My dad said, "That's nice. Are you looking for something full-time yet?" I said yes, even though I wasn't. I was already working full-time, for myself, for the dream they didn't understand. Then one morning an email arrived. A woman wrote that my episode about grief helped her get through the anniversary of her brother's death. She said, "You made me feel less alone." I read it 3 times and it broke something open inside me. That was the moment I stopped caring about what anyone else thought success should look like. The audience grew, slowly at first, then suddenly. People started quoting my words, sharing clips, tagging me in posts that said, "This helped me." Brands reached out. I built a small team, I signed with a network, and one day Forbes published an article titled 30 Voices Redefining Media, and my name was there. My photo right beside it. I stared at that screen and thought about the launch party that never was. I thought about the version of me who would have given anything for her parents to clap just once. I cried, not out of revenge but relief. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. She sounded breathless. "Sweetheart, we just saw you in Forbes. Your dad's printing the article to show everyone. We're so proud of you." I didn't know what to say. I thanked her. She asked me to come for dinner. I went. They had the magazine on the table like a trophy. My dad hugged me hard. My mom said, "We just didn't want you to struggle." I realized they hadn't been cruel, they'd been afraid. They came from a world where safety was more important than joy. That night, driving home, I forgave them, not because they asked, but because I needed to. I stopped needing them to believe in me first. I started believing in myself louder. Now, when they introduce me to people, they say, "Our daughter runs her own media company. You might have seen her in Forbes." I smile and nod. I'm happy they're proud, but my pride came long before that article. It came the day I hit publish. On that first episode, sitting in a room no one showed up to. I tell new creators, start anyway. Don't wait for applause. Don't wait for permission. The same people who doubt you now will one day say they always knew you'd make it. And when they do, you'll smile. Not because you needed their approval, but because you finally understand. Healing begins when you stop waiting for someone else to validate your voice. I didn't need my parents to show up to make my dream real. I just needed to keep showing up for myself. Healing started when I stopped needing my success to be proof to anyone but myself. For the longest time, I didn't even realize how much of what I did came from a place of wanting to be seen, wanting to be taken seriously, wanting the people who once doubted me to finally say, "We were wrong about you." Every small win, every post, every milestone, it wasn't just about progress, it was about performance. I was performing my worth for an audience that wasn't even watching. I'd tell myself I was doing it for the love of the craft, but deep down, there was always this whisper saying, "Maybe now they'll finally see me." It's exhausting building your life as a rebuttal. Every time someone tells you that you can't, you start to define yourself by proving that you can. It's intoxicating at first, success as revenge, achievement as validation. But it doesn't last, because no matter how high you climb, the achy doesn't go away. You realize that the people who didn't believe in you will move the goalpost every time. They'll say it's luck, or timing, or circumstance. They'll clap, but it'll sound hollow, because what you wanted was never their applause. It was their understanding. And that's something you can't earn. I used to chase that understanding like air. I thought if I just worked harder, made more noise, accomplished more, they'd finally look at me and say, "We see you." We were wrong. But the truth is, some people can't see you, not because you're invisible, but because they're not looking in your direction. I remember standing backstage at an event I'd been invited to speak at, holding my cue cards, hearing my name being introduced, and feeling nothing but emptiness. I was about to walk out in front of hundreds of people who admired me, and all I could think was, would my parents be proud if they saw this? And that thought broke me, because I realized I'd built a mountain of proof, but the people I wanted to see it never climbed it. Healing began when I started asking myself, who am I doing this for? Not the imagined audience, not the family who doubted me, not the people scrolling past my highlights, just me. When I started choosing my goals because they made me feel alive instead of validated, everything shifted. The work became lighter, the fear of being misunderstood stopped controlling me. I no longer needed to defend my choices like evidence in a courtroom. I no longer needed to broadcast every win. I learned that quiet success still counts. That private growth still matters. That you can outgrow the version of you that needed to prove something. There was a time when I'd post every small achievement, every milestone, not because I wanted to share joy, but because I wanted witnesses. I wanted to make the people who doubted me uncomfortable. I wanted to say, see, I made it. But that version of me was tired. She was carrying years of unacknowledged effort, and she thought visibility was the only way to make it real. What she didn't know was that healing would come when I stopped using my accomplishments as armor. When I stopped needing to prove I was enough, I finally felt enough. It didn't happen overnight. It started with little things, turning down opportunities that didn't align, even if they looked impressive, saying no to rooms that didn't feel right, even if they came with recognition, choosing peace over publicity, choosing purpose over perception. It was uncomfortable at first, because I'd trained myself to measure worth in claps, mentions, and headlines. I had to unlearn that success is not a mirror. It's a mirror breaker. You can't keep measuring it by how others see you, because their reflection will always distort your truth. I started to notice that the things that made me proud weren't the ones that looked impressive online. They were the quiet mornings when I stuck to my routine, the late nights I showed up for my craft when no one was watching, the small acts of courage no one would ever post about. Those became my private victories. They didn't need to be shared to be real. And that realization healed me more than any external validation ever could. There's a certain freedom that comes when you stop performing for people who didn't believe in you. You start to move differently. You stop chasing opportunities that don't fit you. You stop comparing your path to others, because you're no longer in competition with them. You're in conversation with yourself. You stop building to impress, and you start building to express. And the moment you do that, your work becomes art again, not evidence. I used to think forgiveness meant reconciliation. That I had to go back to the people who doubted me and show them I'd succeeded anyway. But real forgiveness isn't about proving anything. It's about releasing yourself from the weight of needing to. I forgave my parents, not because they apologized, but because I didn't want their misunderstanding to be the lens through which I saw my own light. I stopped wishing they had supported me earlier. I started thanking life for making me strong enough to support myself. The world teaches us to chase recognition, but healing teaches us to chase authenticity. Recognition fades, authenticity sustains. I remember a day when I reached a big milestone. My podcast hit millions of downloads, and instead of calling anyone, I sat in silence and whispered, "Thank you." That was the first time success felt sacred instead of performative. It was just mine. I didn't need to broadcast it or wrap it in a caption. I just needed to feel it. When your worth no longer depends on other people's approval, you start to see how fragile that dependency was. You realize how much time you've wasted trying to convince people who were never meant to understand your dream. You realize that their disbelief was never about you. It was about their limits. You realize that the ones who couldn't see your potential were never your audience to begin with. Healing isn't loud, it's quiet clarity. It's the moment you stop refreshing for validation and start creating from peace. There were so many times I almost quit because I didn't get the reaction I wanted. Episodes that didn't perform well, posts that didn't get traction, moments that felt invisible. But every time I kept going anyway, I was teaching myself that my effort didn't need applause to be meaningful. Every time I showed up without recognition, I was building a kind of self-trust that no award could give me. That's what healing looks like, trusting yourself enough to keep going even when no one's clapping. Eventually, something beautiful happens. The noise quiets. The doubt fades. You stop craving their acknowledgement. You stop checking who's watching. You stop rehearsing your success for people who still don't understand your language. You realize you don't owe anyone your story as proof. You don't need to keep saying, "Look what I did," because what you did speaks for itself. And you don't need anyone's echo to make your own voice valid. Healing, for me, became about acceptance. Accepting that not everyone will celebrate you. Accepting that some people will only show up once the world does. Accepting that their silence was their limit, not my lack. I stopped expecting closure from others and started giving it to myself. I stopped expecting apologies that would never come and found peace in the understanding that they didn't know better. I stopped expecting recognition to make me feel whole and realized I already was. Success when it's driven by pain is powerful but unstable, it burns fast. Success when it's driven by peace lasts. I learned to measure success differently. Not by headlines, not by money, not by who finally texted, "I'm proud of you," but by how at home I felt in my own skin. By how freely I could sleep at night knowing I didn't need to perform my worth anymore. By how deeply I could breathe knowing that even if no one noticed, I was still proud. The funny thing is, when you stop needing your success to prove anything, it starts to multiply. You attract opportunities that fit your soul, not your ego. You create from love instead of fear. You say yes from excitement, not desperation. You stop chasing validation and start creating legacy. And the people who once didn't believe in you, you stop caring whether they ever do, because you finally understand that their disbelief was never your responsibility to fix. There's a version of me that existed years ago, tired, hungry for acknowledgement, addicted to proving she was enough. I think about her sometimes. I thank her for working so hard to be seen. But I'm not her anymore. I'm the version who learned that being seen is nice, but seeing yourself clearly is everything. That no article, no award, no applause can match the feeling of looking in the mirror and knowing you're proud of the person looking back. I no longer chase moments that make others notice me. I chase moments that make me proud of me. That's the quiet, powerful kind of success, the kind that doesn't need an audience to exist. Because healing started when I stopped needing my success to be proof to anyone but myself.